Hello, folks. Welcome to the Getting the Herd podcast here, put on by the McShin Foundation in Richmond, Virginia. We're very excited to have everybody tune in. We got a wonderful show here today. We got some really special guests today. And I just want to remind people, we are the Richmond's #1 podcast, the most favorite podcast, voted by the Richmond Times-Dispatch and all the people who voted for us. So this is an award-winning podcast. So if you're disappointed, don't blame us. We got the trophy. Anyways, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time, but I do want to get some quick introductions. I want to first start with Nathan, and Nathan, you can introduce Matt. Go ahead, Nathan.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Mitchell, and you probably know me. I'm a person in sustained recovery. I am Community Outreach and Advocacy Coordinator here at the McShin Recovery Resource Foundation. I'm also state lead for the Recovery Advocacy Project. So watching the results last night, I was able to get a lot of inspiration from some of the things that have happened over the last several years, but specifically last night, and as far as advancing better drug policy. So I asked our good friend, although he doesn't know it yet, he's my good friend, Matt Sutton, who's Media Relations Director with the Drug Policy Alliance in New York, who was part of the spearheading the measure in Oregon that won Measure 110. I've asked him to come and talk about that and also some of the other policy wins. So, Matt, welcome to the show. Glad to have you. Please tell us who you are, what you're doing, and tell us where your favorite place to eat was when you were at GW.
Thank you so much for having me. And, I already feel like we're best friends. So, so I'm the Director of Media Relations at the Drug Policy Alliance. And I actually myself am a person in sustained recovery. And I've also been somebody that has been negatively impacted by our country's punitive drug policies. I was arrested at the age of 18 on a drug possession charge, and I spent 8 years, in the system, seeing the inside of many jail cells and drug courts and everything. And so I've personally experienced, the harms of our drug policies and this, punitive drug war that we have in the United States. And so last night was incredibly encouraging. The Drug Policy Alliance for the better part of the last 2 years has been, working on this measure. And well, I should say it's mostly been done through our C4 affiliate organization, which is our political arm, Drug Policy Action. And so most of the work was done there. And for the better part of the last 2 years, we've been working on this, and, we've had to overcome some significant setbacks, including a pandemic that limited us from even being able to, collect signatures at some point. So, being able to pull this off last night with, a pretty decent margin, I think really demonstrates that, people are ready for these kind of policies that really replace criminalization with, public health and people-centered approaches.
I see Alex join us. Alex, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm one of the other hosts of this podcast. It's great to meet you, Matt. I really appreciate the work that you guys have done. I'm also a person in recovery from substance use disorder, and we've been talking about this bill throughout its introduction and process here on the pod, and it's just fascinating to see it actually get pulled off on the first try. And I can only imagine the funding and utter awareness of it was huge motivational factor to you guys. So I really appreciate you being on, Matt.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, let me add something. I've been following Portugal's drug model now for 15 years, and I've been following Drug Policy Alliance initiative for a long time. I've been in this space for a while. I'm part of an organization called the Global Recovery Movement, and what we're trying to do is get the Portugal model, get each state to try to flip from their current state situation to more of a Portugal model. And the Drug Policy Alliance seems to have done exactly that in Oregon. And just briefly walk us through what that new law will mean in Oregon.
Totally. And I'm glad that you brought up Portugal, because we directly modeled this after Portugal. That was really our biggest inspiration for this measure. Drug Policy Alliance actually led a coalition of advocates to Portugal in 2018 to really, better understand the model, and kind of, talk to the people on the ground that, had been a part of it. To understand how we needed to implement that in the United States. And, this was our first opportunity to do so. So the way that this works is, we're removing all criminal penalties for personal possession of drug use. Yeah, so it has to be under a certain amount of drug possession. There are still larger penalties for things such as drug sales and intent to distribute, that kind of thing. But if you're caught with a small amount of drugs now in Oregon, you would just receive a citation. And basically what that citation is you can either pay $100 fine, or you can go and get a health assessment at one of the addiction recovery centers that we'll be setting up.
Like an engagement.
Yes. And so basically we're not, interested in, trying to penalize people with that $100 fine. It's just a way to, get people in the door of the with the addiction recovery centers, to really kind of incentivize them, to be able to access the services and really see what services there are available to them. In a very non-coercive way. So if you go to one of the addiction recovery centers for the health assessment, that fine would be completely waived. You're also not obligated, you'd go in, you'd meet with the counselor, they, ask you about your history of drug use, that kind of thing. And then they would determine, what services may benefit you the best and, help you come up with a treatment plan. At no time are you ever obligated to accept that treatment plan, because, as I know, and, the rest of you that are in recovery, I'm sure know, it's difficult to be able to get help until you're actually ready. And so trying to force people into something, before they're actually ready and willing to accept it is probably not going to really benefit them that much. But having that access to services when they are ready for it is great, because currently the system in Oregon is completely underfunded. Oregon ranks nearly last in access to treatment, while 1 in 10 people actually want and need treatment in the state. So this is going to greatly improve that. The other thing is you don't have to be caught with drugs to go to one of the addiction recovery centers and be able to access these services. You can, anybody that wants and needs the services can access them.
I do expect there's going to be a big learning curve here. A lot of trial and error. But do you think Oregon is ready? Because that's a lot of capacity you're talking about for services. And I know Oregon, maybe talk about where they get their funding from the marijuana legalization tax money, but perhaps talk about the capacity that they put in place to start serving these people.
Yes. So our folks with the Drug Policy Alliance have already been involved, in the implementation process, even before last night, because we knew we couldn't wait until we won to start planning all of that. We had to be ready, and so we've already been working with folks on the ground to implement that. By February 1st, we'll already have temporary addiction recovery centers set up by phone. So that people will be able to access those services right away. And also, people would right away, starting February 1st, no longer be, there would be no more criminal charges for drug possession. And then we are setting up an oversight and accountability committee directly made up of directly impacted people who will oversee this and ensure that the legislator respects like the will of the voters and make sure to keep the intentions of this measure intact. They will also be in charge of actually distributing those funds by way of grant money. So like we don't have to like basically like set up a whole bunch of, I mean, we will build physical buildings for the addiction recovery centers, that will be ready by later this year. But a lot of the services that are provided are going to be through existing organizations in the state, but they'll be able to now access this huge pot of money, which, again, as you previously mentioned, most of it comes from excess marijuana tax revenue. So the state never expected to get this much tax revenue from marijuana. But, by the time this would go into effect, later in next year, we're expecting over $100 million in excess marijuana tax revenue that could go towards funding these services, in addition to law enforcement cost savings, which could be anywhere, that's a little bit harder to estimate, but it could be anywhere from 12 to $59 million additionally, from not having to arrest, prosecute, and incarcerate people.
Now, my last good question. Nathan and Alex, I know they're itching to jump in here. Look at places like Seattle, San Francisco. They got a huge homeless population, mental illness related, addiction related. I imagine Portland's got their little hot spot there. So anything on the radar for plans on how they're going to deal with that possibility? This law will add to that homeless population.
Yeah,
a little bit,
Right. So one of the so in addition to just what we see as like traditional treatment services, there's also access to harm reduction, housing services, even employment services. So we recognize that it's not a one size fits all treatment model. There's a lot of things that we have to address, such as homelessness, because it's really difficult to like tell somebody, hey, you need to get sober, if they don't even have a roof over their head, or if they don't have a job. So housing organizations and even things like employment services will also be able to access these funding sources, in addition to like harm reduction organizations, which is really significant because a lot of these organizations like have struggled to be able to access the traditional forms of funding, especially through things like NIH and SAMHSA.
Matt, we got a little group here in Virginia that we're really getting organized, and we want to formalize a push in Virginia to do exactly what y'all just did in Oregon. But Robert Legg, one of our think tank operators, he's asking a question here, and he wants to know, what other states do you think will be next to implement an Oregon model policy?
Yeah, so the ones that we definitely have on our radar that we know about where there are efforts already underway are California, Vermont, and Washington, as well as the federal government, as well as federally. So we have actually, DPA has actually released a federal framework for all drug decriminalization, which follows a very similar model, and we've already received interest from a lot of legislators, and we do expect a standalone bill to be introduced in Congress either by the end of this year or at the beginning of the next session. So I think it's definitely interesting to see how things shape up in terms of what the Senate ends up looking like, in this next session, because I think that can determine on, I think the House could potentially definitely pass a bill like this. I think it's a bigger question of whether the Senate would. So, I guess we'll see. But even, getting that conversation started in Congress is big.
Yeah. I don't think the Senate will do anything, but I do think the House, and you're right, that's a starting point. Nathan, what does Nathan got to do to work with you? Let's get a movement going here in Virginia. We want Virginia to be in line like California, Vermont, Washington. We don't have deep pockets, but we got deep passion and a lot of advocates. I mean, we're ready to team up with DPA and get something going. And I know Nathan, Nathan's a warrior. He's ready to move out for you guys.
I mean, DPA is ready and willing, to like move forward with this wherever, there's a need and a want for it. We're definitely keeping, our eyes and ears open for, wherever there are possibilities to move forward with this. So, it's kind of like, we're ready and willing. We can't wait to replicate this elsewhere. And again, this passing last night, I think, showed it was politically viable. Hopefully that will also mean that, people will understand that this is something that they can invest in, donating to DPA to, bring these measures forward in other states. Like you mentioned earlier, it is going to cost a lot of money to do so. We spent about $4.5 million in Oregon, in a state that doesn't have like a huge population. Because I think one of the biggest challenges around a measure like this is really educating the public, because there's a lot of stigma still around people who use drugs, and or even people like ourselves who are even in recovery, who have used drugs or might have a criminal record. And so being able to overcome those challenges, to really reach voters in a way that they understand this as the like public health issue that it is versus a criminal issue, at this point is still a little bit costly, so I think that's the thing. But again, after yesterday, I think people see that it is worth it. It's not just throwing money at something that's not going to happen. I mean, it's inevitable that this will move forward in other states.
Yeah. I gotta duck out. I got a barn burning back here. I gotta go take care of that fire. But Nathan and Alex going to take over. Matt, we're going to hook up later because we got more work to do. But thank you for coming on and talk to us. Nate, Alex, take it away, big dog.
Thank you, John.
Bye, John.
Yeah, Matt, the main question that I had coming through my head, maybe not the main one, but it's clearly an advantageous law. I'm really curious about what happens to people who are currently in jail for these small amount sessions. So when this law gets passed, are they going to get released? Are people's records going to get expunged for this sort of thing? Or will they get grandfathered in? I mean, what happens to those people now once this law gets put into effect?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And I think, that's still something that will have to be addressed, as the legislature goes to, further implement this. I think that there is a hope that, that we could be able to be, retrogressive in, going back and, expunging records and that kind of thing. But, the measure, in terms of what people voted on, was really just to kind of replace criminal penalties with access to health services and kind of switch up the funding model. Now there's a lot more questions in actually how it's all going to be implemented, and how kind of this larger system of care and changing up the criminal justice system is going to look like. But it's definitely something that we're hopeful for, and that we will be advocating for. Definitely when we are working in the legislative process, in terms of even our federal marijuana bill, they're very much centered in reparative justice, to make sure that we're giving back to the communities that have been most impacted, make sure that we are expunging records and resentencing people. So yeah, definitely something that we will want to address. this measure didn't like, particularly like go right at that, but I think, it will, a lot of those things will be taken care of, through the legislative process.
Matt, I'm very curious about the oversight committee and the makeup, especially of the oversight committee. One of the issues I run into here in Virginia, we as McShin or me as Nathan, participate on several committees, dozens and dozens, and often I'm one of a handful of who's actually has that lived experience, a person in recovery. And I can tell you, I was in a meeting recently where we just went in circles on defining the word addiction, and it's and that had a state senator and several delegates, and I just was, my eyes are bulging out of my head while we're doing this conversation. I'm just like, what are you, you guys are holding the purse strings, and none of you are actually helping. So tell me about that oversight committee and how that works, please.
Totally. And obviously that's still coming together, but what is significant about this oversight and accountability committee is it's made up completely of directly impacted people. So these are people, that have lived experience, that have been through the criminal justice, that have like criminal justice involvement, that are in, recovery or have, involved in like the, treatment community or harm reduction, so these are all people that are really going to make sure that the will of the voters is protected, and to make sure that that these funds go to where they're meant to go. So, I mean, I think it's still, that committee is still being, formed. So, it's hard to tell exactly what it's going to look like, but, the good thing is it will be made up of directly impacted people.
That's great. Robert has another good question over here. Robert asks, didn't California and Oklahoma make an expedited expungement process when they reclassified drug possession from a felony to a misdemeanor? Ooh.
So I do believe, so California, yes, so I do believe that's true. In California, though, like even though it was like kind of an expedited process, it's such a big state that they still had a harder time, and
expedited is a pretty relative term. Like expedited process in Vermont is going to be a little different than somewhere like California.
Right, and I know like California in particular got a lot of help from Code for America, which actually helped them. There was kind of like Code for America. I don't know if you all are familiar with them, but they're like coders. It's kind of similar for like Teach for America. It's like a nonprofit, and like they use their like coding skills for good. And so I know that they were very involved in like assisting with like actually like putting all those records to the system, because it's a big administrative process too. What I will say about Oregon, in terms of that, is Oregon had actually already taken the steps to reduce drug possession from a felony to a misdemeanor. So, there shouldn't be anybody that already has like, felony drug charges necessarily for just possession in Oregon. But, obviously, even having a misdemeanor on your record can still be harmful. I mean, myself, I've been arrested on drug charges and, have misdemeanors, and, it's prevented me from, employment opportunities and, things of that nature. If you've been convicted of any kind of, drug crime, you're not able to access federal financial aid or federal assistance, like nutritional assistance programs like TAMP or SNAP. So I think, those are definitely like challenges. And, again, why this is so important, because, some of our opponents, did definitely argue that, well, if we aren't arresting people for drug possession, like they're not going to get the help that they need. And that is incredibly like, problematic, because again, if you arrest people, you're saddling them with like, a criminal record for life. I mean, they say that, after a certain amount of years, like people don't pay attention to it, or sometimes on job applications, they only ask you like the last 10 years or something. But even 10 years is a long time.
Only, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And even, and in that 10 years, how far does that like set you back from your peers, right? And, and again, like, even though like they might not consider it, I mean, like they still come up. I was charged with drug possession 15 years ago, and I can tell you that it still comes up, 15 years later. So
if I'm correct and I read your bio correctly, you worked on the Hill in DC, is that correct? How did you navigate that? Because I see, so I spent a lot of time living in DC. And I see that you lived in El Paso. You're from El Paso. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah. So you worked on Beto O'Rourke's campaign, and you actually worked with him in DC, which is pretty awesome. How did that work out for you? I mean, were you able to sit in on some not sit in on meetings, or were you,
Yeah, I mean, luckily, luckily Beto has been like a drug policy reformer, for a long time before he ever went into Congress. So I mean, I guess I got lucky, in those regards, because having Beto was aware of my record, and he did not prevent me from working for him on the Hill. And even before that, I was actively involved in his campaign. I led the communications, on his, first congressional campaign. So, I mean, I wish there were more people like Beto that gave people a chance, that have drug charges, and, have, been through the system. But unfortunately, like drugs, it does still have a lot of stigma. So like, definitely like huge props to Beto. I don't think that I would be in the position that I am at today, with my life, if it were not for him like giving me that chance. He really did like give me that second chance. I'm eternally grateful to him for that. But I recognize, a lot of people don't have that, I'm one of the lucky ones, definitely.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. I actually was curious. So like, in Virginia here, when a new proposition or is brought up, it usually doesn't get put in effect until July 1st of the next year. Is that the exact same for Oregon? So when will this law be put in effect? Because that seems like a long time from now. And maybe I'm being anxious or greedy, but I'm real curious about that.
So I think, maybe there in Virginia, it might be that, that's when like the fiscal year starts. But the way that we worded this initiative is that it would take effect starting February 1st. So that's when, people would know. Yeah. So people starting February 1st, no one will be charged with a criminal penalty for possessing, small amounts of drugs. And in order for people to be able to start accessing services immediately, we will set up temporary addiction recovery centers via phone that people will be able to access. So those services will be available as well. The Oversight and Accountability Committee will be appointed also at, I believe, at that time, and then they'll start distributing grant money by June 30th. And then by October, we will actually have the physical addiction recovery centers set up, at least one in each coordinated care region throughout the state. So there's 16 coordinated care regions in Oregon. So making sure that, people have access to those services, no matter whether they live in, a highly populated place like Portland or in like the very like rural outskirts of Oregon. We want to make sure that people have access to those services wherever they are.
That's wonderful. Now, Matt, this is such an incredibly broad. Sorry, I've got a bit of an echo in here. This is such an incredibly strong forward policy movement here. There were a couple of other policy wins yesterday as well, and I don't want to stop the conversation on Measure 110. However, I do want to make sure we give time to acknowledge the adult use that just passed and the medical marijuana that just passed in some of the other states. So you want to talk about y'all's work on that, y'all, especially as it relates to Virginia, which Virginia just passed decriminalized marijuana on July 1st this year. And our joint legislative audit and our legislative review committee is putting together recommendations that will be released on November 16th about legalization and a path forward for legalization. We have a pretty favorable legislature at the moment for legalization and a favorable administration, although we're going into a gubernatorial race next year. So I know for me personally, I'm a person affected by the criminal justice system. I'm a felon as a result of a possession charge here in Virginia. And that to me, you mentioned the declassifying, I've been using the word defelonize drugs here in Virginia. So what do you think about marijuana laws? What do you think about defelonize, and do you have any thoughts on the reality of what Virginia is right now, more so than I might?
A lot
of stuff in there.
Yeah. So, I mean, specific to Virginia, I don't have, a ton more information than what you just shared. I think, we're all hopeful that they will be able to move forward with legalization. I think it's been one of those places that's been talking about it for a lot, and that, they've definitely been talking about it more, over the past year. But I would say, one of the most significant things about last night was really the places where, where we were able to secure marijuana victories. So, places like, Mississippi, where we, passed medical marijuana, that, being able to move that far into the South, in an area that is particularly hard hit by the war on drugs, and the racial disparities are huge there, is really significant. In South Dakota too, we passed marijuana for adult use. South Dakota has the highest arrest rate for marijuana possession of any state in the nation, and so to be able to pass that in a very red state is really significant. And we also had victories in Montana, Arizona,
mm-hmm.
New Jersey, where DPA has been working on, advocating for reform for almost 2 decades. I think really just shows like the broad support for marijuana reform and really drug policy reform more broadly, and that it's not just a Democrats issue, Mississippi and South Dakota are very red states, and they came out to, in strong support of, marijuana reform yesterday. And, Arizona too, it's like, it's 50-50, red and blue, but, still, again, strong support for it. Montana is significant too, because like Montana actually has the highest racial disparities in marijuana arrests of any place in the country. So, that passed is really significant. Again, I don't think that we would have never expected to have marijuana reform victories in states like these, a few years ago. And I think this is really significant and really gives us a lot of hope for, being able to pass federal reform as well.
No, absolutely. It makes kind of like the blue states almost even seem like, what are we really up to? I mean, Virginia's been pretty routinely blue for the last like 3 or 4 years. And when you see a state like, as you said, Mississippi, South Dakota, Arizona, routinely red, makes us feel really behind the 8 ball, which is why we're kind of like, what's going on?
Right. That's why they should just move straight on forward to all drug decriminalization.
Sure.
And I guess, legalizing marijuana at the same time, right?
Well, So living in the reality, it's funny though. We have, you can sit on the same stage with a sheriff, or a prosecutor here in Virginia, and hear the words, we can't incarcerate our way out of a healthcare crisis. We can hear that over and over and over again from the same people who continue to incarcerate the people who are suffering from a healthcare crisis. So
Right.
It's like, how do we change that narrative? And I think, certainly I absolutely decrim and legalize. Do you think an incremental step of pushing towards a defelonization? What would you do next? I don't know how familiar you are with Virginia politics, but I think maybe we could talk maybe offline at some point and maybe help some strategize with us a little bit, because we are in a position to make some change right now, and I think without the spotlight of the country looking at us, looking at an election and really working towards it. Next year, every year is an election year in Virginia. Next year we have the entire House of Delegates and the governor up for re-election. So, there's an opportunity there. There's an opportunity to make a case for some more meaningful criminal justice reform without the weight of the entire country looking at us. So I don't know. How can we do this? Where can we go from here? How did you make it work in these states that you didn't think it would work in?
Yeah, I mean, I will just say, Oregon. I mean, Oregon's been like more, progressive in their drug policies in general, but like it didn't just start. We didn't just show up in Oregon and say, "Hey, we're gonna like decriminalize all drugs." We've been actively engaged with Oregon, partnering with organizations there for quite some time. We helped them. They were one of the first places to like decriminalize medicinal marijuana, and then they legalized recreation marijuana for adult use back in like 2014, and they defelonized all drugs a couple years ago, and so like it's been building towards these kind of reforms. It's one of those things where like it's not necessary that you have like incremental wins, because like at some point it's just like we have to recognize that like drugs are not something that people should be criminalized for, but we should put that more under a public health umbrella. But lots of times that is the way that it happens. It does happen in incremental steps, and I think it's like it's a little bit easier at times to get people to accept something like that when they've already seen that the sky has not fallen over these smaller wins. So I would think that probably similar things will start happening in Virginia. I almost personally I feel that it's a matter of time before Virginia legalizes marijuana, and I feel like at that time, they will definitely do. I mean, I believe that they will include in any measure, the expungement and like resentencing of other marijuana crimes. Of course, that doesn't benefit people that have, like myself, that have charges, outside of marijuana. And I think, that's where we have to look at again at like defelonization of all drugs and of course like decriminalization of all drugs, and really look at the resentencing and expungement of those things.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious also. So you mentioned that the timeline would probably have like brick and mortar treatment facilities come October, correct?
So these are not going to be so. The addiction recovery centers will not be like treatment centers. They're mostly like the places where people go to like have the health assessment, and where they meet. It's kind of like that. It's like the front door to being able to access services, and that's when they like meet with somebody and they can talk over a treatment plan and that kind of stuff. They will have like triage there. So, they can help people with like urgent needs, such as, overdose prevention, those kind of things. But most of the things like actual treatment will be provided by a lot of like existing organizations in the state that will now be able to access that funding. And I mean, it'll be a lot more money than they've been able to traditionally access. So hopefully like they'll be able to, have room for a lot more people. They'll be able to offer new programs that they wouldn't have been able to offer before. So I across the board, I think we'll be seeing all of that happening very quickly because, again, that money will start being distributed by June 30th.
Okay, yeah, and that was part of my follow-up question is exactly kind of like how much of that would be state funded. I think the triage center is a great idea for like urgent care because I know, Nathan and I, we advocated at the General Assembly for Danny's now law where people need to be treated urgently and then just not sent back on the street really quickly.
Street.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I don't know. It makes me think like, is it still going like? Can people access this completely state funded? Do I need any healthcare insurance for treatment? Like, how does that come into the picture? Because if I have health insurance, say I don't have health insurance, do I still have access to all of this because it's state funded, or is there going to be like a copay scenario or something like that?
Yeah. So anybody that wants and needs services will be able to access them no matter what they can afford. So like, anybody that doesn't have health insurance like won't have to pay anything for them. It does work with like health insurance. So if like people have existing health insurance, like they'll take like the health insurance, they'll like, because it's like, okay, well, that's not money that has to come out of the state's pocket and
the government, sure.
It can be reserved for the people that can't afford the services. But yeah, nobody's going to be like, nobody will be turned away from it. And I think that's, really great because, there is such a limited supply of treatment resources available in Oregon right now that, people are literally, we're in an overdose crisis. People are literally dying, waiting to access treatment, and there will be no reason for that moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, Robert has a last question. It's just kind of like a two-parter. It was asking, will decriminalization remove the incentive to get people to enter drug court? And I guess what were the primary arguments against decriminalization in Oregon? So that's kind of a two-parter there.
Well, I will say that I hope it serves as I hope it removes drug courts because drug courts are incredibly harmful. And I myself was a participant in a drug court, and there's no that is not treatment. That's not health services. We cannot connect treatment and health services with the court system or the criminal justice system. That's very harmful. It provides people that are struggling with drug use a lot of trauma. And would we do that for somebody that had like diabetes or something, send them to court to manage their health condition? And then, if their sugar went too high, we throw them in jail. Oh, you had a cookie, now we're going to throw you in jail. No, we would not do that to somebody that has diabetes. But we think that somebody that's struggling with substance use disorder, we should put them in a court where they go in front of a judge and are shamed and humiliated, and thrown in jail for like the smallest thing. Like I'll say, throughout my time in drug court, I never actually encountered any actual health professional. Like it's not what they make it seem like. And you have police officers that are part of the court showing up to your home in the middle of the night. And if you don't answer the door because you're sleeping and don't hear the door, they assume that you're not home, you broke your curfew, you're getting thrown in jail. These are the kind of policies that we've engaged to try to prevent people from using drugs. It's very, very harmful. I certainly hope that drug courts cease to exist in Oregon. I know maybe not everyone agrees with that, but I think if they spent any time actually in drug court and really understood what it was, they would not be advocating for it.
Yeah.
I've heard people say it's about 1 in 100 that actually succeed throughout the entire process. Like sincerely, 1 in 100. Not to cut you off, Nathan.
No, it's okay.
I would believe that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers, but I would say that 1 in 100 sounds pretty ambitious, actually. Pretty good because I know around here, when you become a felon because of a drug possession charge, you lose your driver's license. It's revoked. So you take away the means to travel. Often drug courts are not accessible by public transportation. You have to go when they call you. So that might mean calling you at the last minute when you're supposed to work. Your drug courts are not set up to help. They're set up, to be punitive as well. And as I'm seeing Robert say, and I know Robert offline here, drug courts have bipartisan support. And I think because it just sounds like a good idea. So changing the narrative on that is something that I have been personally, I didn't have that experience. So I'm really glad to hear your experience with that.
Sure.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like whoever's messaging around drug court has done like a really good job, because they're making it seem like, oh, we're not criminalizing people, we're helping them get treatment. That's not the case. It's not treatment. It's not treatment. It's criminalization disguised as treatment. And so that's the thing. Let's not give people a drug court. Let's actually give people health services. Let's connect people with actual health professionals, that can actually help them with their health issue. Like connecting people with police officers and judges is not going to help people with a health issue. It just doesn't work. And we've learned that, throughout the last 50 years of this war on drugs, that we wasted money. And, what do we have to show for it? We have more people criminalized on drugs, than anything else. And, we have, we're in the midst of an overdose crisis. We have more people dying of accidental overdose than at any other time in our country's history. And stuff. So what we're doing clearly isn't working. We have to try a different approach. And the places that have tried, all drug decriminalization, such as, Portugal, like we mentioned, have seen really, really good results. What they have seen is, overdoses have gone down, infectious diseases have gone down, and the amount of people that are voluntarily entering treatment has gone up incredibly. So I think that is all the proof that we need. They've been doing it for nearly 20 years, and it's had an incredible amount of success. They're not the only ones. Switzerland is also another really good model, but Portugal really has been the best documented case of this, and we know from them that this definitely works.
The last question that I personally have, at least, is so this is the first time that this has happened across the nation, and there's going to obviously be a very high demand for healthcare professionals in some sort of facet, which one is awesome because it'll give more people jobs in a bunch of different factions. But the thing is, that's a very high expertise and experience type of people that you need. Is there enough supply of those people to keep up with the demand that is obviously going to happen?
That's a good question, but I think, the economy is still struggling with COVID and everything. So I'm pretty sure there's people that are going to need jobs in some form or fashion. So it's not something that we would expect of having a healthcare shortage. I think, these are the kind of questions that we didn't have to think about before, because there wasn't funding for these kind of services.
Sure, obviously.
Not having enough people to work for them. So, in some ways, that's a good thing. I mean, obviously, we hope that there will be enough people to work, but if more people have to go into these fields, I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Nathan, you got anything, buddy?
Well, I do actually. And this might be getting a little too in the weeds. We've gotten a lot in the weeds in this, but one thing that one space where I exist is looking at recovery outcomes and identifying recovery outcomes and how we measure them qualitatively and quantitatively. And I'll be honest, I get a little nervous when I hear about, government's oversight of different things. And we talked about the oversight committee a little bit. I want to go more into that. Who determines recovery outcome? How do we determine? Well, actually, let me back that up. If I recall correctly, you said that you can get out of the ticket by simply showing up and getting an assessment. Is that what I'm understanding? So really, that in and itself is the instrument for, okay, I took care of it. I don't have to do what they suggest. I just got out of my ticket. That might answer my question right there. So as long as recovery outcomes are self-determined by the individual, working with other individuals who have lived experience, I'm okay with the idea and crafting that recovery model.
I mean,
I think I lost my question.
No, I understand what you're saying. And, I know that in a lot of ways, I'm sure the results of this will be measured in a number of different ways, including, by the Oversight and Accountability Committee. But yeah, I mean, I think, the bottom line here is that anybody that wants and needs access to services will be able to access them, at whatever the time is that they need to access them. So, yeah, like you're saying, I think in that way, those metrics will be self-determined because, if people want help, they'll be able to get it. If they don't want help, then they won't get it, and it's like, I think, that's the probably the right way to go about it, because it's just like, I mean, it's like anything. If somebody is like fighting it and just not at the point where where they want it or feel that they need it, it's probably just not going to benefit them. So I think it's like it's like it's those metrics are hard to like live by, I think, but I feel good knowing that anybody that wants and needs the services will now be able to access them.
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see, like, I can imagine a metric that's like how many assessments it took before someone actually decided to get treatment or something like that. Like, I think that's something that's very helpful to know, that like, all right, maybe the average person isn't ready until they have like 3 charges or something like that. Like,
right.
and that would help, me and other people look back at our history and say, that actually kind of checks out a little bit. Right. or people in other states and whatnot.
Right. And I mean, the other thing is too, I mean, the other good thing is, again, it's not just, traditionally what we see as treatment. I think, some of the other services, people might be really interested in, like if they're struggling with, housing security, being able to have, some assistance there, or job, assistance, really being able to kind of address the full range of people's needs. I think, that might really, address some of like the underlying causes of, what's going on with them. I mean, we've seen that in other places, by providing people with housing, has like really greatly improved health outcomes. So, I think that's also a big part of this.
Mm-hmm. That's great, man. I mean, you've been a wealth of knowledge and information with even with all this, myriad of obstacles in the future and unanswerable questions. And it's been really informative to me, Matt. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Matt,
I certainly enjoyed this.
Good. Matt, I do have one last question.
Sure.
I'm not going to say President-elect Biden. However, possible President-elect Biden, very famously said during I think it was the last debate, about getting people into treatment and not incarcerating. I don't have his exact quote right here, but he essentially just said what you guys just did. And how much hope do you have that were Biden to be our next president? Do you have that he will follow through with that word and actually work work, not just put the lip service in, but actually put the work in to make that a reality for all Americans? And how do we hold him accountable?
You know, this definitely keeps me up at night.
Oof, I know, right?
Because Biden was one of the chief architects of the crime bill. That really harmed people, and he has advocated over and over again for coercive treatment, including drug courts. So all of those things really terrify me. I'm glad that he has said, we shouldn't be criminalizing people for drugs and, should be providing them health services. I think that's the right approach, and at least hearing that that's where he wants to go. And obviously he has personal experience, dealing with a family member that struggled with addiction. So I think, that definitely probably helps, in his thinking. But I mean, you can't just say something like that, like we don't need to arrest and criminalize people, we need to provide them help. But okay, but you're not talking about decriminalizing drugs, and that's what it would take to actually do that. If you want to stop arresting people for drugs, you have to in the criminalization of it. And I haven't heard him ever say that he wants to do that. So in some ways, I think it's, I feel like it's a little bit hollow. Even with marijuana reform, Kamala Harris, his running mate, is actually our Senate sponsor of the MORE Act, which is our, marijuana legislation. But Biden has, only advocated for rescheduling marijuana, but never completely removing it from the Controlled Substances Act, as the MORE Act would do. So I don't know, I feel like maybe if Congress were to pass some of these, reforms, I don't think that a Biden administration would necessarily stand in the way and try to block them. But do I think that he's going to necessarily lead on this revolutionary change? Probably not. No.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that honest assessment. Matt, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? It was a pretty awesome day yesterday.
No, just I'm really glad that I could join you all today. Look forward to moving ahead. To the next frontiers of bringing, all drug decriminalization, to other states and hopefully federally.
Cool.
It's a major win, buddy. Major win for the recovery community. Thank you for all the great work you've done, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up with you on another state in the next year or something.
I hope so as well.
And hey, listen, I'd be glad to help spend that $4.5 million if you want to bring it to Virginia to do the same thing.
Good to know.
We'll be talking a lot more.
We got to replenish those our bank account right now.
Don't we all?
Thank you, gentlemen. Nathan, love you. Shout out to our producer, Todd. Matt, I'll see you around, man. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Great. Thanks again, Matt. Good to meet you.
You too.
Hi, everyone. I'm Honesty Liller. I am the CEO of the McShin Foundation and a woman in long-term recovery since May 27, 2007. I have not used drugs or alcohol. Woo woo! Thank you so much to the Richmond Times-Dispatch and all of our voters for Get in the Herd podcast. Those podcasts are amazing. Not only has it helped thousands upon thousands of people in their recovery, as well as family members, but it has helped me in my personal recovery. I get to listen to them now in my car through Spotify and iHeartRadio. And it's just really, really important for us to be innovative in the addiction field and the recovery community. So when COVID hit, we had to be innovative. We really had to think of what can we do to reach people that cannot go to 12-step meetings, smart recovery, faith-based, whatever, that we're shutting down constantly. So we were innovative here at McShin. Let's start podcast. So with Todd, John, Alex, and some other staff, we all just kind of jumped in who can do what. And with Todd's lead and John's lead, The podcasts have been amazing and we're still doing them today. So I want to thank you for all of your votes and all of your energy and all of your support of our mission of healing families and saving lives. Thanks.